Hey, everybody's here, and I turn it over to you as the chair to run the meeting. And so for the agenda, the first part of the agenda here is to introduce you. So if you want to introduce yourself real quickly to the rest of the trustees, go for it.
Yeah, I was looking at that going, I think I'm going to turn this over to Sam, and you gave it right back to me. Well, hello, everybody. This is Patrick Hughes. And first, it's an honor to be here on the board with you. I'm kind of drinking through a fire hose, trying to do a lot of catch up. Orientation will be coming soon, but going through the main minutes, it's obvious to me this is really a high functioning department and board. The things that were done in the last meeting had some really great impacts on your members. So that was really cool to see on the finance deal with parks, and then moving around for the doctors to get DOs involved and stuff. Pretty darn cool. It's very impressive. So I've been personally, I've been in Oregon since '76, moved here from Tokyo because my father decided he wanted to live in Tokyo for 3 years. Born and raised in Michigan and Chicago. Still might have a slight accent Midwest, but not really. And I've been in insurance, risk management, legal for pretty much all of my career. Currently, I'm the risk manager for the city. I've been chief risk officer for Oregon State University and then for school districts down in Eugene. So I've been kind of living that life, got to see many, many different things. So I hope I bring value, and it's again, it's an honor to be involved here, and I look forward to working with all of you and the team over at FPDR. So
Glad to have you, Patrick. Also, just a quick reintroduction of Catherine McLeod. Catherine was brought in as a citizen trustee, 2019, if I'm correct. And then about a year or so ago, she was asked by the mayor to go up and take the mayor's designee position. So we had a board chair while we were trying to get the board completely filled. And now she's stepping back into a role as citizen trustee. So glad to have Catherine staying with us as we go ahead. And then Patrick, it's just at this point you call, meeting minutes. Does everybody have anything to add to the meeting minutes, and then just take a vote?
Yep, May 24th minutes. Was it the 24th? I believe it was. Hopefully they've been reviewed. I guess the question is, first, any questions or additions or edits? And if not, would need a motion to approve them, and off we go.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, that motion to approve the May 28th meeting is approved, and now we can go through no action items. So we're down to informational items with the state of FPDR. And Sam, is that you?
Actually, we have an introduction of visitors. I think, Julie, can you drop the
Gotcha.
right now? And also one technicality, we need to take a formal vote. We got first and seconded, but we didn't get a vote on the meeting minutes.
Oh, great. All in favor? Aye.
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 Aye. We have a super quick discussion point, if I could, on the meeting minutes.
Sure.
That'd be a question for Stacy. Just want to double check on the interfund loan discussion, assuming that all went as planned. It could be just a simple yes/no answer.
Yep, it sure did. Yep, and we've made 2 draws on it already. Council approved it on July 17th, I think, and yep, all is well.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Probably call that vote again if it's okay. I heard 2 ayes. Post that question. Everything the same?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And the minutes for May 28, 24 are approved. And Sam, do we have visitors? I can't tell because the screen's being shared right now.
No, we don't. The other names you see on there are closed captioning people and some of the support people that keep the Zoom meeting up and going for us. That's why you see the extra people.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, we did have, yeah, Julie, can you drop that? I made a mistake. There are some other people that you ought to be aware of, Patrick. Franco, well, why don't we just go over here? So Stacy, Patrick, you know Stacy. Do you know Kim?
I have met Kim, at least talked to her a number of times, correct?
Okay. And then we have Franco. Franco, you want to wave and say what you do for us?
Hi, Franco Luchin. I'm legal counsel for FPDR from the City Attorney's Office, and I'm certain we've met before, Patrick.
Yep. I spend a lot of time over there for good or bad reason.
Welcome.
Then we have Lauren. You want to introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. Patrick, nice to meet you. I think we've indirectly spoke probably by email on occasion, but I'm an outside legal counsel for the trust.
Okay. Good to meet you, both of you.
Okay. Now, okay, so we're ready to move on to the next step.
No action items, so down to informational items on the state of FPDR. Sam, is that you again?
Yeah, I'll start it off and then we'll hand it off to both Stacy and Kim have sections that they'll present to for you. Okay. So this is for Patrick, for you. Every year, fiscal year, we give in September, after the end of the fiscal year, we give an update on the state of FPDR, a recap of what we've done for the year, quite a bit of detail, slides and charts showing numbers and important information that we think the board should have. And then also just a brief view of what we're going to be doing for this fiscal year that we've already started. Everybody's free to ask questions as we go through the presentation, because there's a lot of information. If we wait to the end, everybody's going to forget what their questions are. So why don't we go and flip to the first page here. So a quick recap on a couple slides of what happened last year during the last fiscal year. We continued recruitment for the vacant FPDR board positions. We had the position, we didn't have a full board for over a year and a half. So we did a lot of time searching for people. Commissioner Gonzalez's office, the mayor's office supported the effort. Big challenge for a couple reasons. One is that so many people in the city that like to volunteer for these type of things were being tied up with all the organizational change committees and functions there. So there was a smaller pool to draw from. Also, what interesting for us, we have a requirement to be on this board for the citizen trustee positions, not Patrick's of the police or fire, but for the citizen trustees have to be citizens of the city of Portland and live in the city. And that takes quite a few people out of consideration when they're really interested, but they don't live in the city, so they're not able to do it. So that took up quite a bit of time for me and a few other people trying to recruit various people. We did do an interview process, which is the first time we've done it. That did not yield any successful candidates out of that with it. We amended the rules to expand the definition of a physician, including physician assistants, nurse practitioners, and naturopaths. Again, just to recall, this was to bring us in line with workers' compensation. Us having different definitions of a physician between workers' comp and us was a lot of confusion for the medical providers of what could they do for other worker comp injuries and then our disability injuries. So we wanted in line with what the state workers' comp was doing. I think it's a big plus for us too, because we now don't have to, we can actually take information from these particular providers, which we couldn't before without a MD signing off on it. So it makes it life easier for our members and for our providers. We have the CPPW, which is what was it? Okay, Stacy, help me. It's Kim. City of Portland professional workers.
Professional workers.
There we go. Contract. It's a new union that was formed. It took it took maybe 700 positions that were not unionized in the city and have unionized them. This includes now half our staff in FPDR. They're undergoing during last year undergoing contract negotiations, and they still are. So it's basically status quo, how we dealt with people, how we worked with their schedules, and how we paid them as was before the contract. So there were minimal changes. There were a few, but what they said is keep everything status quo until the union contract is resolved. We had the 2023 legislative session. This was a short session. I spend a lot of time monitoring these sessions because there's oftentimes little sneaker bills that will come in and either impact PERS or our disability retirement or workers' comp, which could then roll into impacting our disability. Then there's other different laws throughout the state that may have the impact of that. So I'm watch that closely. This year, they think they had a couple items on small, well, depends on your opinion, your view, small items on PERS and a small item on workers' comp, which was they added physician assistants to workers' comp. And this is, we just piggybacked our rules on top of all the new laws. Next slide. So for disability this year, recall that we had one MCO closed. So we had to decommission that MCO out of our system and get members transferred over to MCO. And Patrick, MCOs, you probably are aware of that, but through RISP, but managed care organizations that provide, the medical care for our disabled members. And so one closed and we brought in a new one and then we brought in a replacement. So we had two new ones and one closed. This was a tremendous amount of work to make all this happen. We typically don't have anything like this happening but once every 4 or 5 or 6 years. And this, we had all three of these happen within a year and a half. So it was a tremendous amount of work with Kim and her staff and also our systems analysts having helped get a lot of the technology stuff done with this. Pension and finance, again, a 227 pay period retirement months, third highest year on record. And Stacy will go more detail when she gets into her slides on this. And during the process, we had to help out central accounting with some finance functions because they were understaffed. And so we pitched in to help them on a few items going forward. And again, when we do that, because our staff is very busy with our stuff. So when we help somebody else out, that puts a load on us, but it was something that had to be done. And I think they bail us out sometimes too. So it was reciprocal for assisting them. Leave reimbursement backlog, just real quickly, and Kim, correct me if I mess this up really bad. Leave reimbursement is when somebody's on disability and they're using their own leaves, sick leave or vacation, because they may have filed the claim 30 days after the disability. So there'd be 30 days they use their own sick leave. There's a possibility that we could have denied a claim and then it gets opened up later. So between the denial, when the claim is approved, they use some of their own time. So if we approve a claim, we go back up to the date of disability and reimburse them for all leave they had used to cover that period of disability, because that should have come out of FPDR, not out of their personal leaves. And so we did have a backlog on that. It was, some people were pretty vocal about it. So we spent a lot of time last year and got all the leave reimbursement backlog cleaned up. We streamlined the process and the checks and balances in the process to making sure that we don't get backlogged again with that. And for a technology side, we hired a new business systems analyst. That was Lily Acevedo. She's been on a couple months now, still trying to, she's drinking from a fire hose on all of this. Okay, flip over to page 4. Oh, Kyle, you had a question?
Yeah, real quickly, you were talking about the leave reimbursement that has been streamlined. It's definitely an issue that has come up from my membership in the past. Do you have any more details about the streamlining? What does that mean, this process has been streamlined?
Sure, I'll be glad to help with that. So one of the major points we had with the leave reimbursements, Kyle, was sending out the forms that the members need to sign so that we could have permission to do that transfer of their accrued leaves back to FPDR pay. And we just had a problem getting the forms back. And so what we created is a pre-authorization form. And so instead of sending it out at the time we are processing the leave reimbursements, we send it out on the initial claim. That is part of the claim setup documents that we have them sign. That way, when we are ready to process those reimbursements, we have everything we need. Occasionally, we still have to pursue the members to sign the forms to give us permission. And there are times too where there may be a question about the period of time authorized. If it didn't show up initially and has come up later, we're working to make sure that we've got the proper authorization to pay the benefit. But I think the biggest driver and the biggest change was getting that pre-authorization done in advance because it's really sped up the process on the back end.
Has that been added to the purple packets?
Yes. Oh, no, sorry. We send that out with our pended letter. So once the member has filed the injury claim, it goes out. The purple packet, it was more time efficient and more need-based to just give it to the member once they filed the claim.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kim. So what's happening this year, 24 to 25? We mentioned before the CPPW labor agreement. We expect it to be implemented sometime during this fiscal year, and we're uncertain of how this will impact how we manage CPPW staff. Presently, there is no 40-hour limit to their work because they are considered FSLA exempt employees, so they don't have the overtime requirements or overtime pay. We're quite certain that will change with the contract when it comes in. We oftentimes, when people worked pretty heavily, like during the audit time or during budget time, or sometimes a wave of claims will come through. Well, people that work more than 40 hours, what we do is sort of give them a little bit of time. Next week, they can work a little bit less than 40 hours. So we flex their schedules around. We have a lot of ability to be flexible with them. I'm certain we'll lose some of that going forward. So when that agreement is agreed to and signed, we will come back to we'll do analysis of how that impacts how we manage our staff, if there's any budget impact with it. And then given that, what would be any impact to our members, or what do we need to do to mitigate any impact to our members? And we'll share all that information with the board once the agreement is signed and we've done the analysis.
Sam?
Yes.
Trustee Hughes has his hand up.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Sam, I'm curious, do we have anyone on the negotiating committee with that union, or are we just relying on city HR to inform us how it affects?
I believe we do not, from FPDR, have anybody on it, with only 19 people. And at this point, we just don't have the bandwidth to do it. But I do think, what am I trying to think of? I do think our service area, budget and finance service area, has 1 or 2 people that are on it. And then there's HR in the city attorney's office.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. As you know, the city is going through an organizational change from our standard commission form of government to an actual council form of government, and then a separation of the management to the city. Am I trying to think of? The mayor will do it, and then we'll have a city administrator and deputy city administrators. So all the management tasks will be taken out of the council's hands with it. So there will be some changes being made. We just had the change made in July to where they created the service areas. Like I was talking with Patrick, we are part of the budget and finance service area. We'll go more into this in the November meeting when we have a little bit more background of what's happening. And then when we move into next year, when we have a new council, a new mayor, I'm not quite certain if there'll be additional changes being put down. Part of my job is to insulate FPDR and our members from any of these changes. Been successful at it. We're unique enough that nobody's really trying to get their hands in and trying to change or maneuver stuff around in FPDR. So as far as our members are concerned, I doubt they'll see any impact by this change. So we have, we're onboarding right now our mayor designee. This gives us a full board. So Patrick's on board here. We're going to do some training with Patrick, and then we'll do some additional trustee training. I think, Tom, we owe you some more things. Were going back and forth between the vacancies. We did not keep up with the training. And so we'll get back to Kyle, Christopher, and Catherine, see what additional trainings you would like to have. So we'll get back onto a training program with that. This year, we have the 2025 state legislative session. This is a long session, about 6 months. And it will be, this is the one, again, if there's chances that stuff will come and impact FPDR, they're most likely to come out of this session. I've not heard of anything coming yet. that possibly would, but I won't know probably for another 2 or 3 months. And what I will do in our January board meeting is outline what I look for, how I look at all the bills that come through the state, which ones will potentially impact FPDR or members. And then I'll start sharing you the progress as we go through that legislative session. And we'll review and update the continuity of operations plan. This is what we do in case there's a major event that, the earthquake is the most common one, Cascadia zone, but there's other situations. There's be flooding or major, storms that will shut the city down for a week or so. That's happened in the past. The full plan that we had the last major update was just immediately prior to COVID and our move to remote work. And so we definitely need to update this plan, taking into account hybrid work for staff and throughout the city. So that's what we're going to be doing this year, is updating it, taking into account the new work models. And then for the disability, we're going to complete the onboarding of the new managed care organization. So I said there was a lot of work there. We've got some of the organizations from their side are having to do more work to help us. So we have to make sure that we get all the enrollments are going properly. The data is being exchanged properly between us and them so we can bill correctly and pay them correctly with that. They were going to strike the second bullet here, hire and train a new disability analyst. Kim may discuss that a little bit later as to why we're not doing that, for at least at this time. Pension and finance, update banking process as well as Fargo. All our direct deposit payments, which are virtually all our pensioners and all our long-term disability people are receiving direct deposits, they go through Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo is changing their process of how we give them information and what they do with their information to get those direct deposits to happen. So this, if we do all this transition correctly, the members won't see any issue with it. It's just a lot of back end work on us of what information we need to keep and give to Wells Fargo, how we process it. And it's some significant changes in how they want to do it. So it's on the back end that Stacy and her team is working on it, and our business systems analyst is involved with that too. We're going to update the retirement education materials, pension workshops, and website. Things like on workshops, we had a Social Security section. Most people didn't find it very useful because they don't have Social Security. So we've now changed it to financial planning. We did it the last meeting, and that was well received by everybody. So that's the direction we're probably going to go. We're going to look to see if there are any other improvements we can make to the workshop. The website, it's a little bit old, and it was put together. They redid all the city's websites about 6-7 years ago. And we don't like the structure they put us in. So we're going to be looking how we can change some of the web pages so they're more friendly and usable for people, as well as the portal for people. We have a new citywide budget process to align with the organizational changes. Again, they involve the new service areas, which it used to be each bureau budgeted and then passed it up. Now all the bureaus within a service area coming up and creating their own budget, and then that's getting rolled up to the city's budget. And Stacy will go more than that to you in January when we do present the budget. She'll walk you through the whole process. So a couple challenges with the budget. This is a new budget process and a new organization. So we're launching through it. The interesting thing is they'll be halfway through the budget process when a new mayor and new city council come on board. So where everybody's sort of waiting is how are they going to weigh in? Are they going to want some of the budget stuff done differently? Or are they just going to accept the work that's been done going forward? So that's going to be interesting to see what's happening there. For the most part, it doesn't impact our budget because we are a very technical budget. We aren't, involved in a lot of the political stuff and the policy stuff for the city. We just have to make sure we have the money to pay benefits. And so this process, I know I shouldn't say it doesn't impact FPDR because Stacy and her team are having to do things differently, but all in all, our budgets are going to remain pretty much the same that we've had before. But again, Stacy will go through that to you in January. Improve the pension estimate process. Stacy will go a little bit more on that of what we're looking of what the pension estimates are doing and what we're looking to do later this year. So she'll do that in her section of the presentation. One more slide. So technology, the first one is upgrade the firewall for the database and other improvements to do the new banking process. This is all necessitated by the Wells Fargo change. We went in and said, okay, we're going to be doing more data and keeping more complex data in the FPDR database. And they said, you've got to get that firewall upgraded significantly. So that's what we're in the process of doing. Again, the second one is going along with our managed care organizations. We have a lot of technical aspects. This is mainly reports and feeds of information back and forth and getting the information in such a way that we can bill and pay bills appropriately. And each MCO has their own way of how we do bills. So we have to have 3 different tweaks to the system, and that's creating a lot of work. But again, that's just expected when you have this 2 new organizations. Automated pension estimates. Again, Stacy will talk over more of the pension estimates later. Then we have the disability claims. We went just at the time COVID hit, everybody was told go home and work from home. So we had done some pre-work on converting all disability claims into digital or paperless claims. And so everybody hurriedly accelerated that project over a matter of a couple months when we had planned to do it over a 1.5 to 2 years. And so I think it's a time for us to come back and take a fresh look at everything that we put together and can we do it better, simpler. Content managers our digital document retention system. Is there better ways that we can use it? So that's what we're looking to do. We're going to improve the usability of the FPDR website. Again, like I said before, it was created several years ago. We want to do this across the board, not only for the pension side, but everything. And this also coincides with a new project that was started last week from the city. The city has to comply with the ADA Title II new rules for websites and websites accessibility. With that, there's quite a bit of rules, especially for people that are using scanners and readers and other things to help them review things like these slides or anything on the website. And the city has to be in compliance in April 2026. So I think it's an opportunity as we move into compliance with that, we can take a look at each of our pages and improve them and get away from us using PDF documents and stuff. And can we move stuff onto the web page? So we'll be working on that over the next year. Any questions on what's happening or what happened last year?
I have a comment when you talked about moving to the new MCOs. It is really, really difficult. So you kind of made it sound like it was just a small bump in the road. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think I make it a small bump because I think Kim and her team have done a tremendous job bringing those people on board with it. And Kim's worked very hard, and she's reached out to your area, Patrick, for Sue, who's using one of the new MCOs themselves for the city. So
yeah,
actually we let Sue do a little bit of the lead for us.
Sue likes that. Good for her.
Yeah, with that. Okay, you want to flip to the next slide, Julie? Okay, so this is the FPR org chart, pretty straightforward on what it was. We just it's a reference for where we are. The group on the left is a disability team. Excuse me, not disability team, it's the finance, what do we call the finance pension team? That's who all make sure we get the right pension coordinator. She does a lot of the work to making sure all the pensions are paid correctly and checks and stuff are going out. We have everybody in the green side that they are all the people that do the money work, trying to make sure we have the right kind of money, all the accounting, the budgeting. With that to go with office support specialist, she's the one that keeps the office running with all the detail. We have the disability accountant. It's a financial side, but it helps the blue people on the side, on the right-hand side, which is the disability claims. These are all the people that handle the claims. And above there, we have the legal assistant, which is Julie. And then we have the business systems analyst who's been helping out a lot. So this is just what the Bureau looks like. Next one, slide 8. we call FPDR programs. Usually when we do budgeting or at times when other parts of the city look at what does FPDR do from an internal perspective. So there's 4 things that we consider a program. The first one on the left is pension benefits, which is FPDR1 and FPDR2. We're here to make sure everybody gets the appropriate benefit for the appropriate length of time. The green, the second from the left, is sworn PERS contributions. That's a part to making sure that FPDR3's people contributions are made to PERS. Disability and death benefits, pretty soft-spoken. This is the one that Kim's team heads up. Make sure everybody gets those kind of benefits they need and investigates and administers those claims. And the one on the right is administration support. We have several people that provide help to all the programs in the Bureau. And so we just sort of put them under that area. So this gives you just a snapshot of what we are about in FPDR. Okay, number 9. So the next few slides are key performance measures. These are measures that we think of, slides that provide you with data that we think impacts the fund and our members. It helps you understand the finances and the volumes of stuff that are happening throughout FPDR as we go through, and each slide has a different view of something that's happening in FPDR. So this first one I'll do, and then I'll turn the rest over to Stacy. This is percent of workforce on disability as of June 30th. We had to choose one day a year, so we chose the last day of the fiscal year of how many people of active members in all the bureaus are on disability at this time. This graph doesn't look that exciting here. The range is anywhere from 3.2 to 3.5. This year it was a little bit lower, and that has something to do with the claim count, and Kim will go over that. This graph used to be extremely important. If you go out back another 10 years, so 20 years ago, 15 to 20 years ago, this number would have been 7 to 9%. So that was part of the goal. My predecessor here was to, hey, let's start managing this program professionally. And that's what they did. And so the decrease to this, what I call pretty much a level area right now. And we're not looking to drive this down any farther. This is an acceptable level. This just allows us to measure and take a look what's happening. So the transition of the disability decisions from the board to FPDR in the 2007 charter change contributed to a lot of this look, because the Bureau was using claim investigation and claim management that met industry best practices and standardization, being fair and objective between all claims. And then in addition, we have a commitment of both the fire and police bureaus to transitional duty work and light duty work for people. So if you can get somebody back to doing some kind of work and out of their lazy boy chair and away from their remote and their can of beer and their TV, they will likely come back to work sooner and faster and be healthier for doing that. And this ties into the third reason why is we have a strong work ethic with all the bureaus. Every member wants to get back to work somehow. And so that's part of our job is when we work with the physicians through the MCOs, what are you doing to get this person back to where they can go back, maximum improvement so they can go back to work. And so that's part of it. So this says, hey, we're at a good place today compared to what we were 20 years ago.
Sam?
Yes.
Obviously, when I saw this, there's the spike in 21, 22. Do we know, is that pretty much a result? I see the same type of things on my end. Is that protest area problems coming into play there or something else?
That was COVID.
That was COVID?
Because we had a
Presumption.
we paid a lot of COVID claims.
Okay.
With that. And you'll see later with Kim's numbers on the claims, you'll see that same spike there with that. Okay, why don't we flip over to number 10 and let Stacy go for it.
All right. Hey, everybody. For the record, I'm Stacy Jones, Deputy Director, but what I do every day is run the pension and finance functions. I'm going to keep talking about performance measures, and then I'll talk about the pension program a bit before handing it over to Kim. You guys know, as always, interrupt me. Just shout out or put your hands in the air, I guess, figuratively. Julie, will you let me know if you see anybody's hands up, since I can't always see it well while I'm looking at slides. So let me dive in and talk about performance measures that are kind of more in my wheelhouse. This slide shows the number of FPDR2 retirements from active service each year, with the total number of retirements on, oh, I'm sorry, no, it just shows the total number of retirements. The total number of retirements on the left axis, and police retirements in, naturally, blue, and fire retirements in red. For the benefit of our brand new Chair Hughes, welcome, and a reminder for everybody else, FPDR2 members are sworn employees who were hired before 2007, but they were not already retired or on long-term disability in 1990. So when FPDR2 members retire, they get an FPDR pension, and we pay their pension benefits directly. At this point, all new retirees are FPDR2 members. The main takeaway from this slide is the fact that last year was another insane year for retirements. We had more than 90 new retirements. Now, that did include an unusually large number of former separations who were starting their pensions last year, but we still had 70 retirements from active service, directly from active service. So that made last year our third highest retirement ever, third highest retirement year ever for total retirements, and our fourth highest retirement year ever for retirements directly from active service. So it was a very busy year on the retirement front. And you can see on the graph, it comes, not too long after our very highest, retirement year during the pandemic, at the height of the pandemic, speaking of things that were happening in the pandemic times. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about retirements when we dive into the pension program later in the presentation, but that's just a little preview for you to see how many retirements we've had over the last 4 years. It's been very busy on that front. We can flip to the next slide, Julie. So when FPDR2 members retire, they are replaced by newly hired FPDR3 members. And FPDR3 members are those who are sworn employees who were first hired in 2007 or later. So they are enrolled in Oregon PERS for their pension benefits, but the FPDR fund, and hence the FPDR property tax levy, pay their PERS contributions. So we still care about them. And of course, we still care about them because they are also still covered by FPDR's disability plan instead of workers' compensation. And they also have an FPDR non-service disability plan, just like our FPDR 1 and 2 members. So this slide just shows the percent of the active duty sworn workforce that is made up of those FPDR members. And as all those FPDR2 members have been retiring over the last decade, as we just saw on the previous slide, the workforce has increasingly become more of an FPDR3 workforce. We've gone from less than a third FPDR3 members at the start of that decade to about 2/3 FPDR3 members now. And it is the case that police is a higher percentage of FPDR3 members than fire because the police workforce turns over a little more quickly than the fire workforce, but they are still both in the majority FPDR3 member territory at this point at both bureaus. We can go on to the next slide, Julie. So let's take a look at the FPDR tax levy. So Chair Hughes, the board has seen this chart ad nauseum because I just love it for some reason, but let me explain it to you. We pay virtually all of our costs with a dedicated property tax levy, the FPDR property tax levy, which is separate from the city's general government levy. City charter caps that levy at $2.80 per $1,000 of real market value. And it always pays to keep in mind that real market value is quite different from assessed value, which is what we all actually pay property taxes on. But the cap is on real market value. So this chart shows where the FPDR tax rate has been over the last 5 years and is projected to be over the next 20 years in relation to that cap. And the cap is depicted as a red line at the top of the chart. So most pension plans that you will hear about in the world measure their financial sustainability by measuring the size of their unfunded liability, if any. But that doesn't make sense for us because we are a pay-as-you-go plan. So from a practical perspective, our plan is entirely funded with this dedicated levy. So the real question for us is whether this dedicated funding source will always be enough to pay for the plan. So that's why we want to keep a very close eye on the levy. And we want to continually model it as far into the future as we can reasonably go to make sure that the levy will always be sufficient to pay for the plan. So that's what this slide shows. And the slide has, just gotten better and better really over the last 10 years in terms of getting us lower and lower under that cap. So the blue line, the first 5 years on the slide, shows the actual levy rate for the last 5 years. And the orange line shows the projected levy rate for the next 5 years that was developed in-house, developed by my folks on the FPDR finance staff in collaboration with the city economist over at the budget office. Beyond that, you see two different projections, both developed by Milliman, which is the independent actuarial firm we have under contract. Every 2 years, they do a kind of a full-scale stress test of the levy, and they come up with a range of probabilistic outcomes in terms of the levy rate. And what you're seeing is two different versions of those outcomes. The brown line on the bottom shows their projection at the median probability, the 50th percentile outcome in the tens of thousands of possible scenarios that they've run. And the green line shows their 95th percentile outcome from that modeling. In other words, 95% of outcomes were below that green line. So you can kind of think of the green line as a worst case line and the brown line as a likely line in terms of what the levy rate will be. So what does all that mean if you look at it? The bottom line is that the levy is not projected to be anywhere near the red line, not even at not even at the peak in the early to mid 2030s in terms of when the levy rate is at its peak. And the levy rate will hit its peak about the time when we project the entire workforce will be FPDR 3, and we'll be paying PERS contributions on those folks, but we'll still have a full contingent of living FPDR 2 retirees to whom we're paying direct pension benefits. After that moment, you see the levy starting to slowly decline as expenses start to gradually ease down. So this looks good in terms of the levy holding up as our funding source for the plan. The analysis on this slide was completed with data as of June 30, 2022. Milliman is updating this analysis as we speak, and they'll have a new analysis to present to the board in January with data as of June 30, 2024. I do expect it to just prep yourselves. It's going to be slightly less rosy because we had flat RMD growth last year. I don't know how many of you know about that, but it's not going to be anything that pushes us significantly closer to that red line. It's just not going to look quite as nice because of that flat RMD growth last year. Are there any questions about the tax levy? The rest of the board has seen it so many times. You guys should all take a vote and say if you ever want to see that slide again.
Well,
No, maybe I don't want to know the outcome.
if you have any, I'm just curious, what's the worst case scenario? What factors could cause everything to go sideways? Like 2 or 3?
Well, so, the reason that Milliman sort of scrapes off the worst 5% of scenarios is because it gets really kind of apocalyptic, almost. It's like the kind of thing that, Peter, the city economist, calls like the Tsarist, Russian collapse scenario, where we have like a complete stock market collapse that makes our PERS contributions skyrocket because, that can't really happen because of rate coloring, but it makes PERS contribution rates go up, really dramatically. We have a total collapse in real market value, which makes us push up against the cap, more quickly. And we have, a whole bunch of retirements that happen and get way ahead of deaths, kind of like a whole bunch of really bad things happening all at once, which is very unlikely unless there's some sort of civilization-wide problem going on. But some of those things do move together, as Milliman, will talk about when they come in January. Like, is it impossible that we would see a stock market downturn at the same time as real market value declines dramatically? Well, no, because those could both happen. Those are both macroeconomic things that could happen simultaneously. So some of those things could more realistically happen at the same time than other things. But yeah, those are all because there are quite a few factors, because PERS contributions increasingly become a factor, and they're a much more volatile and unpredictable factor than just paying pensions out to our FPDR2 folks.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? All right, if we move on to the next slide, Julie. This next chart, which is the last chart where we're talking kind of about performance measures, this chart shows two measures which attempt to get at how efficiently and cost effectively we're administering the plan. The gold line shows administrative spending as a % of total plan spending, and the purple bars are administrative spending per plan participant. And both are, really common measures for tracking administrative spending in any kind of a benefit plan. But for us, in general, I think administrative spending per participant is probably a better measure because the number of plan participants is relatively stable in general. On the other hand, our total budget is increasing exponentially while we phase in the funding of these two generations of retirees simultaneously. So that makes administrative spending as a % of total spending lower and lower, all things being equal, which looks great, but doesn't really truly reflect efficiency. So I prefer the spending per participant measure. But this year, it's a little bit strange. At any rate, both measures dropped last year in 23-24 after increasing a bit in 22-23. And it is true that administrative spending in total was a bit lower in 23-24 than it was in 22-23. Because in 22-23, we had a really large vacation leave payout to a longtime employee who was retiring. And we had a few more vendor payments than usual for some one-time projects. But the denominators also got bigger for both measures. And as I just mentioned, and as happens in most years, our total budget grew, which made the % of budget spent on administration go down. But this year, our total number of plan participants also went up sizably for the first time in quite a long time, which I'll talk a little bit more about in the next slides. So that also made spending per participant go down. And that's a little less common. Normally the size of our membership is pretty stable, as I just mentioned. But we have had so many retirements over the last few years that it's far outstripped mortality in the retiree population. And the fire and police bureaus have been doing a better than expected job of filling those retirements. So the active population hasn't declined too much, which, putting those factors together means our total participant population has gone up. So again, bottom line on the slide is that the drop that you're seeing last year in both of these measures of administrative spending is really more reflective of growth in the denominators, the total budget and the total number of participants respectively, than it is of declining administrative spending. Administrative spending was essentially flat in total between 22-23 and 23-24, which is still something considering, inflation between those 2 years. The other last thing to say about administrative spending is that it is so small in the FPDR plan. We're talking about less than $3 million. That little tiny things, make it fluctuate a lot in percentage terms. Any questions about performance measures before I talk in a little more detail about the pension program?
I'm going to ask a real quick question, Stacy, and then I apologize. I'm more thinking out loud than asking a question. You just mentioned that 22-23 number is a little higher due to a large vacation leave payout. And I guess I never really realized the vacation leave payout came from the FPDR side, because all vacation is paid through payroll through the general fund for the Bureau. So is that just because someone has severed their service, that they're in retirement, the vacation leave payment comes from FPDR?
So this is for our own employees. So for an FPDR employee.
Thank you.
So
Got it.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Yep, got it.
Yep. All right. So moving on then to talk about the pension program. We'll move away from bureau-wide performance measures. And after I talk about pension, I'll pass it on to Kim to talk about the disability program. So let me first start with how many people are we paying pensions to? This slide shows the number of people who received a pension benefit at any point in the fiscal year. So that includes retirees, surviving spouses, widows, widowers, and divorced spouses. The total number of pension beneficiaries is in bold at the top of the bars, with the percent who are FPDR 1 versus FPDR 2 beneficiaries in the bar charts below. So FPDR 2 are in beige and FPDR 1 are in purple. And the first thing I need to say is that the total beneficiaries, the bolded numbers at the top of the bars, were wrong in the packets that you were sent. They are correct on the screen and correct in the materials that are now posted on our website. So I apologize for that. It's an error that we caught yesterday. I'm sorry. The numbers had not been moved over for a year, I believe was the problem. So for Chair Hughes, again, and then just to refresh everyone else, FPDR 1 members, again, are employees who were retired or on long-term disability in January 1990. FPDR 3 members are employees who were hired in 2007 or later, and FPDR 2 is everybody in between. So FPDR provides FPDR pensions only for FPDR 1 and 2 employees, and FPDR 3 employees are in PERS for pensions. So the people on this slide, are a mix of FPDR 1s and 2s and their beneficiaries. So FPDR 1s are a dwindling part of the retiree population. They are, getting up quite in age at this point. If you think about the fact that they were essentially all retired by 1990. So as of June 30, we only had 241 FPDR 1 beneficiaries left, 91 retirees, and 150 surviving spouses or ex-spouses. So the rest of our retirees, 1,772 of them are FPDR 2 beneficiaries. And those are mostly members, mostly retirees. So of that 1,772, 1,611 are retirees. So a much smaller mix of spouses in that, which makes sense because they're younger, so not as many surviving spouses. But the main thing to notice on this slide, other than the fact that we are moving towards more and more towards an all FPDR 2 retiree population, is just the overall growth in the pension population, which I referred to earlier, both last year, notably, but also over the last 10 years. The number of pension beneficiaries has increased by 224 over the last 10 years, which is about 12%. But last year, 23-24 was the second biggest one-year increase on the slide, 58 increase of 58 in the pension beneficiary population, which is really just short of the biggest year on the slide, biggest increase, which was fiscal year 2021, when the pension population increased by 61. And those of you who are on the board then know that 2021 was our biggest retirement year ever, at least for direct service retirements. But back then, unfortunately, we were also seeing unusually high mortality because it was the height of the pandemic. That is not the case now. We had 54 deaths last year as compared with over 70 each year during the pandemic. So the bottom line is that retirements over the last few years are swamping mortality in that pension population. So the number of pension beneficiaries is really growing. It's really grown over the last decade, but it's especially grown over the last 4 years. Can you flip to the next slide, Julie? So we can take a look at our active population. So this slide shows the total number of members actively working, sworn employees actively working at police and fire as of June 30 each year, in bolded numbers at the top of the bars, and the percent who are FPDR 2 versus FPDR 3 in the bars below. FPDR 2 is still beige, but now the purple bars are FPDR 3 instead of FPDR 1. So just as the previous slide was a mix of FPDR 1s and 2s, this slide, active employees are a mix of FPDR 2s and 3s. Remembering again that those FPDR 3s hired in 2007 or later, and they're ultimately going to get a PERS pension, not an FPDR pension. However, the FPDR fund, the FPDR property tax levy pays the PERS contributions, the city's PERS contributions for those FPDR3 employees. So they're still a big cost to us. So that means that at least in terms of pension costs, not disability costs, but pension costs, active FPDR2 members don't cost us a dime, whereas active FPDR3 members only cost us money while they're working because PERS is a pre-funded plan. Those FPDR2 members don't cost us anything until they retire because we are a pay-as-you-go plan. So the pension costs that we're incurring every year, which are the vast majority of our spending, are coming from everyone on the previous slide, plus the purple bars on this slide. So there's really, nothing on this slide that we haven't talked about plenty over the last several years, which isn't to say it's not interesting, it's just, it's not new news. Obviously more and more of the active population are FPDR3, which means we're getting closer and closer to that moment of peak expense when the current working generation is fully transitioned to the pre-funded PERS plan. But the current retired generation is mostly still living and requiring those pay-as-you-go pension payments. The second thing that we've talked about a couple times over the years is that you can really see in this slide that the size of the sworn workforce has declined. There are 135 fewer sworn employees now than there were 10 years ago. And that is entirely at police. There are actually more sworn fire employees. There are 670 sworn fire employees as of June 30, 2024. There were 647 at June 30, 2015. But police have gone from 899 sworn employees at the start of this 10-year period to 741 at June 30, 2024. So, setting aside, population growth and all those things, just, in sheer numbers, the sworn workforce is quite a bit smaller than it was 10 years ago. That said, I do think one thing that is sort of new that's coming out of this slide that we haven't talked about before is that both bureaus have done, as I mentioned earlier, a pretty decent job, better than expected, honestly, of kind of keeping up with the massive number of retirements over the last 4 years. There's that big drop in 2021, but after that, they managed to more or less hold the line. So at least they're not continuing to lose ground, at least not quite as much as they just get, they're getting swamped with retirements in the same way that we are. I'm going to flip to the next slide, Julie, so that we can talk about how all these folks cost us money. This slide shows all of our pension expenses for the last 10 years, again in bold at the top of the bars. Oh, no, I'm lying. Okay, no, we don't have the total. We just have we have it broken into two pieces. PERS contributions for active FPDR3 members are the top bold numbers that are in the purple section or on top of the purple section. And direct pension benefits for FPDR1 and 2 beneficiaries are in the tan sections of the bars. So no surprise here, both are growing as we continue to ramp up to that moment of peak expense, which will probably happen in the 2030s. With a little less than 2/3 of the active workforce in PERS right now, PERS contributions were just shy of 40 million last year. But I don't want anyone to be misled into thinking, oh, okay, we just go like another third and then we're where PERS contributions are going to be. It's still going to get significantly more expensive over the next 10 years because, of course, 100% of the workforce will be in PERS eventually. But also those PERS covered employees are going to continue to promote into the higher job classes and premium assignments that are currently dominated by those remaining older FPDR2s. And of course, PERS contribution rates will probably continue to go up and wages will continue to go up. So it's going to grow by more than another third for PERS contributions. Yeah, Kathy, I see your hand up.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Are the police positions vacant and they're trying to hire?
Yes.
So
yes.
How to budget for increasing pension costs for PERS given those vacant positions?
So we always, yeah, that's a really good point and a really great question. And so every year when we do the budget, like honestly, the hardest part of the budget for PERS contributions. Actually, overtime is becoming maybe the hardest part. The second hardest part is like the wrangling that we have with the police bureau over how many positions they think they can actually fill over the next year. They always have way more vacancies than they can conceivably fill. They always have a very ambitious hiring plan and, you know, think they're going to fill all of them. We don't ever want to budget for that because I don't want to overtax people. And so we're always trying to find that line. But I am, you know, watching that they have hired a lot of people over the last couple of years, and they are doing a better job of bringing folks in the door. So we are, you know, probably going to budget a little bit on the higher side if that keeps happening, to make sure we always keep plenty in fund contingency to cover if they hire more than we think. And there are no PERS contributions for the first 6 months of most hires unless they lateral in from somewhere else. So that helps too. We, you know, it's not a huge cost driver, the new hires, but it is hard to tell. You know, at fire, it's easy because they fill all their vacancies. They sometimes get into a problem of being able to get enough people through training. So sometimes they have to let vacancies sit because they can only put like 12 people through an academy at once. So they sometimes have logistical issues. They don't generally have hiring issues that police does.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And I don't know if Trustee McClowry or Trustee Culp have anything to add to that from their perspectives of police and fire. No, we're shaking their heads. Okay. Let's see. So yeah, going back to costs. So yes, so PERS contributions, expect them to get much more expensive. And then looking at the beige section of the bars, those 2,000-ish pension beneficiaries, they're costing us about $150 million a year. That's also going to continue to go up because, as we just talked about, retirements have been outstripping mortality. I would sort of expect that to continue on average for the next few years because it appears that we're kind of going through this demographic hump of retirements, which I'll talk about in a minute. And also that pension population, eventually they're going to become 100% FPDR2 members, and FPDR2 pensions are more expensive than FPDR1 pensions because they have a different formula and they just are more expensive. So looking at growth, the FPDR 1 and 2 pension costs grew about 4% last year, and they've grown 48% over the last 10 years. And FPDR 3 PERS contributions grew 27% last year and have grown 466% over the last 10 years. And if you're wondering, that actually fits almost perfectly with our modeling. So there's nothing surprising in any of this. It seems a little shocking the first time you see it with the PERS contribution piece, but it's actually, with some bumpiness, playing out pretty much exactly as we predicted. At least over the last 10 years or so. I think the modeling earlier when we first switched over to PERS did not anticipate PERS contribution rates going up as much as they have. But now we know that we're on a never-ending train ride of PERS contribution rates going up every 2 years. All right, I'm gonna have a few more slides to talk about retirements and pension estimates, but before I do that, are there any more questions? No, all right. All right, let's talk for just one more minute about retirements because I am tired of talking or looking at bars, so let's look at circles. Can you move to the next slide, Julie? Bars or circles, we're not very creative as finance types. We don't have a lot of shape creativity. So the earlier slide we looked at with retirements was broken out. You showed retirements broken out by police and fire. And this shows only service retirements. So retirements directly from active service, not people who had separated earlier or were on disability. And it just shows them in total, you know, not broken out by the Bureau. And it also shows retirements over a longer period of time. Since the plan was closed to new entrants in 06, 07, And it shows retirements in relation to the timing of those 27 paid 8 months, which first came into being in 2008. So each year's retirements are represented by a circle, which is sized to be in proportion to the number of retirements. So if you're moving left to right through time, you start with fiscal year 06-07, which was our largest service retirement year ever. And that was the last year that the plan was open to new entrants. It was the year of big charter reform. There's just a lot of uncertainty, I think, in the sworn population that year. And then you end with the last year, fiscal year 23-24, which was our fourth largest service retirement year ever, and the third highest since the 27 paid 8 retirement months came into being. So I think I've used this slide maybe once before, but I like it because it really makes the high and low years pop out. And I think it puts the last year in context fairly well. You can see, last year was one of our highest years for service retirements, but it wasn't off the charts like 2021 and 06-07 were. That said, of those 4 highest years, it's the only year without a really clear contributing external factor. Those 3 other really high years, there's an obvious reason why they were so high. 06-07, we had charter reform. 08-09, that was the first 27 paid 8 month. Everyone was excited to take advantage of that. 2021, the craziest year. There are so many external factors, I don't even know where to start. We had 2 27 paid 8 months. It was the height of the pandemic. We had 360 some days of protests. We had wildfires. It's not a fun time to be a public safety employee. So this is the first time we've seen that many retirements without us being able to say, okay, there's a real clear reason for that. And looking at the age and years of service of our population and the number of pension estimates we've had over the last couple of years, it just feels like we may just be at the start of moving through that demographic, kind of hump of just the timing of the workforce, moving into having a lot more retirements over the next few years. This slide also, of course, helps you see that relationship between retirements and 27 paid 8 months, which have become the single most important factor in retirement timing. The blue dot years are years with no 27 paid 8 months. The green dot years had 1 27 paid 8 month, and the orange dot years had 2. So what can you see from all that? I'm sorry, go ahead, Kyle.
Hi, Stacy. I feel like in the past years, you maybe had a number that was the number of eligible members or members eligible for retirement broken down by bureau. Do you have those numbers, or is that in a different presentation you've done that?
It must have been in a different presentation, but we can easily get that for you. Yeah.
Just curious.
Yeah, no
Okay.
problem. We can send that out to the board, yes. So looking at, kind of that relationship between, what years had 27 paid 8 months, which years didn't. I mean, the only big year with no 27 paid 8 months, and it was before 27 paid 8 months existed. And Chair Hughes, if you want some more background on that, I'm happy to fill it in for you because they didn't exist until 2008. But, after that, I think, we see, years with 2 27 paid 8 months do have more retirements than years with just 1 27 paid 8 month. But what's really noticeable is that almost nobody retires in years that don't have 27 paid 8s. Since the creation of the 27 paid 8 months, 777 members have retired, and only 51 of them retired in a year without a 27 paid 8 month, which is less than 7%. Of course, some folks retiring in a year with 1 or more 27 paid 8 months do retire in a month that doesn't have 27 paid 8s. So it's not, overall, the percent retiring in a 27 paid 8 month is around 75%. But I do think this slide helps you see how the 27 paid 8 phenomenon has created a lot more bumpiness in retiring and in hiring for the police and fire bureaus, than any other factor that's in play here. At the same time, the bumpiness is predictable because we know when the 27 paid 8 months are going to happen. So, I don't know, that's what I keep saying to the chiefs. Yes, it's bumpy, but at least you know when it's going to happen. Which, in your business, that hardly ever happens, right? So that's just a little more context on retirements. Any questions before I talk about pension estimates? Okay. So this is the last thing I want to talk about before handing things over to Kim, pension estimates. So pension estimates are not something that we normally talk about during the state of FPDR. Pension estimates are a service that we provided for members for a long time. I mean, as long as I know at FPDR. But so they're not something that have policy implications or impact our finances, or they're not a core operational function. So it's not something we normally talk about at this level. But over the last couple of years, pension estimates have just been consuming more and more and more of my finance staff's time. And it's been taking us longer and longer to turn them around for members. So last year, I brought this issue to the board for the first time. We talked about the major reasons for that. Estimate requests have grown about 50% over the last few years. Over the last several years, estimates have also become increasingly complex and time-consuming. Just to kind of recap, maybe more for Chair Hughes, a lot of that has to do with labor contracts. Premium pay types have doubled for sworn employees over the last decade. There's also been an explosion in variable pays like work out of class and coach that require their own special projecting. That's mostly at police. Frequent changes to both old and new premium pays in terms of timing and percentages. So some labor contract complications. The members are more sophisticated than they used to be. Maybe we're hiring smarter people. They're asking for more sophisticated scenario-based estimates. And something we didn't really talk about last year, but my analysts have been pointing out to me, is that they just increasingly see employees using these estimates, not just to figure out what their pension will be close to retirement, but to career plan, throughout their working lives. We get lots of calls of, well, what if I promoted? And what if I switched to night shift? And what if I did this and that? And then also rehire programs, which have kind of come and gone at police, but are back strongly at police, and have just come into existence at fire, which generated a lot more interest in retirement and more estimate scenarios for folks to look at, employees that they want to see. On the efficiency side of things, we've become less efficient at doing them, on top of them getting more complicated, because we had transitions on the FPDR finance team, in particular the retirement of the financial analyst who had done the majority of these estimates for decades. So those were kind of the things that we talked about last year. So the two things that members care about when it comes to pension estimates are, one, that they're as accurate as they can reasonably be, and two, that they get them within a reasonable time of asking for them. So let's talk about the second issue first. What is a reasonable time to get an pension estimate done for a member? I don't know, actually. And I should start by explaining that when we talk about an estimate, we don't mean just one retirement estimate for one date. We mean a set of estimates that a member has asked for. Typically, they ask for several dates and or scenarios. So when we say an estimate, it's usually 3 or 4 estimates for 3 or 4 different dates or scenarios. So we used to be able to get most estimates returned to folks within a week. So this is what we have data on going really far back, is the percent of estimates that we have gotten out to folks within 5 days. And the percent of estimates that have been returned to people within 5 days has been falling for the last few years, and it's now less than half. But when you dive into the data, you can see that at the median, last year in 23-24, at the median, it takes 20 days for us to get a set of estimates back to a member. But there is a lot of variability within that. Urgent estimates get done in a day or 2. On the other hand, there were 13 pension estimates that took longer than 6 months last year. Now, those 13 estimates were folks who were asking for dates out, in the late 2020s or 2030s, but 6 months is a long time to wait. Can we pop to the next slide, Julie? Thank you. The good news on the estimate front is that estimate accuracy remains really high, which members do tell us is the most important thing. In fact, accuracy has been even better over the last 5 years than in the previous 5 years, which might have to do with another thing that's slowing us down, which is that as we've hired new finance staff, I have to review the estimates a lot more closely. But accuracy remains high, which is a good thing, especially given the increasing complexity. But the bottom line is that pension estimate volume has gone up, efficiency at doing them has gone down, accuracy has stayed about the same. So last year we focused on process changes and improvements that didn't require additional resources and didn't significantly impact member service. So we trained 2 additional staff members, and just for background, there are 2 financial analysts who do everything finance related at FPDR, budget, audit, actuarial, everything. They also do these estimates. But we trained 2 additional staff members in our office to do some parts of the pension estimates that are more clerical or involve like straightforward data entry manipulation, like running the automated part of the estimate process, which, portion of it is automated, running the database and SAP reports. Anyway, I won't go into too much detail, but analyzing the variable pay patterns, stuff that's basic sort of data analysis. We reduced or eliminated some steps that we thought might be overkill on the accuracy front. I mean, for example, we only do pay reconciliations for folks who are within 4 to 6 months of retirement now. And we only balance reconciliations to within 0.5%. And then we leave any issues below that threshold to be resolved when people are actually retiring. We did put some restrictions in place for members, but that didn't save us much because most members were not exceeding this. We restricted members to a maximum of 4 scenarios per estimate request and a maximum of 2 estimate requests in a 12-month period. So we did have some frequent flyers that were impacted by that, but most people are not exceeding that. And we prioritized actual retirement estimates over resignation estimates and kind of career planning estimates. We restructured the queuing system so that when somebody hits like that 6-month mark, they move to the top of the queue, even if their estimate is a long way out. So we made some changes. And those things helped, but they did not eliminate the problem. We got totally caught up on estimates once, maybe twice, but the mountain just reformed within weeks. So this year, we are going to try to focus on technology solutions. As you know, we had an unexpected retirement in our business systems analyst position, and we have a new person hired and coming up to speed. Sam hired that person back in May, and that person, has to be involved in identifying those technological solutions, even if we hire someone outside. So that's what we want to focus on for the next year. I will say that it's virtually guaranteed to be a lower volume year in 2025, even no matter what. Because we are getting to the end of a really crazy 27 pay date month streak. We have had 3 27 pay dates. By the time we get to the end of this, we'll have had 3 27 pay dates in an 11-month period. December 2023, June 2024, November 2024. And those months also happen to be about 6 months apart, which matters because the fire, retire, rehire program requires 6 months of notice. And I had the funniest conversation with the fire chief about, I'm like, does it have to be 6 months? Could it be 5 months? Could it be 4 months? Can we come up with something different? After we get through November, we don't have another 27 pay date month until May of 2026. And we have no contract changes until mid-2025 at the earliest. And that's another thing that prompts a lot of estimate requests is when labor contracts change. So, even all things, if nothing were to change, it's going to be a lower volume year next year anyway. So I would expect processing time to increase. Our staff, who are getting better and better, this are going to get better and better. But we clearly need to make some technological improvements. So we need to focus on that. Chair Hughes, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Very lengthy discussion in May on this topic about pension estimates. What I couldn't get clarity on was there was a discussion of going after a consultant. Is that a working item or is that a discussion we'll think about it? Because it seems pretty hard to put onto one analyst to redesign a program.
Yeah, I might let Sam launch into a reply around that, but yeah, Sam and I have talked mostly about hiring a consultant.
Yeah.
It will just have to involve our business systems analyst, and she's the programming person who will probably need to oversee that contract. But Sam, I'll let you talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that we were proposing to talking about that, and just given the way things are going, and we got some of the improvements on the workflow changes, but not what we were really hoping to get. So I think it will be probably high probability within the next 6 or 8 months that we will reach out and maybe put an RFP out for a contractor that can come in and sit down and do the whole process analysis and then come up, figure out how to way to code it or do it some way electronically better.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
But as Stacy said, it still requires business systems analysts will have to definitely be part of that effort too. And so, but that we're taking a serious look at that, and we'll probably wait until next calendar year before we start looking into that.
And I'm going to make a big assumption that your BSA is also part of CPPW.
No, she's part of what is AFSCME.
Oh, ask.
Oh, okay. So
Formerly DCTU, but AFSCME.
either way, it will impact.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Chair Hughes. Trustee Kramer, I see your hand up.
Stacy, do we know what % of the estimate requests that your office gets are from people who are either retirement eligible or within 12 months of retirement eligibility?
We do. We can easily find that out. I don't have that at my fingertips. It's a good question. Off the top of my head, I would say most, certainly a majority, but definitely not all. We actually get quite a few resignation requests, especially from the police bureau, for folks who are thinking about leaving and going and looking for a different job. So they're not retirement eligible. And one of the process changes we did was we deprioritize them. I mean, they still get them, but we push them down in the queue so that we're making sure we're prioritizing folks who are actually retiring. But we also get a lot of requests for folks who are asking for dates when they would be eligible to retire, but they're very far out. And I absolutely hate to push those people back, because the best time to plan for your retirement, is the minute that you get hired, actually, which those folks are in PERS. But if somebody wants to retire in November, that's obviously more urgent than somebody who's looking at a 2035 retirement. And we get a lot of those as well, which is good. People are doing some financial planning. What is getting harder and harder is that they're just, the folks they're just smarter and smarter about calling us to say, I'm thinking about becoming a lieutenant. I'm thinking about switching to the CERT team. I'm thinking about switching to night shift. Is it worth it? That career planning sort of choice thing. They've sort of identified us as not only helping them figure out the impact on their pension, but we're the best source to figure out the impact on their pay, because we know a lot about their pay. So that's also like a service that we've sort of started providing over the years. Again, a little bit more on the police side than the fire side on that stuff, I would say. And Trustee McClary, I know that you sat with Asha, like while she went through a pension estimate or something. I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to the discussion from that perspective.
I mean, I can give you a little bit of my impressions of, we sat for an hour and Asha went through, she had an example. It was I believe a police sergeant, the process. And it was a Zoom meeting, so it was very hard to keep up with some of because it was just all spreadsheets and layers of spreadsheets and drop down. So it was hard to follow a little bit, and some of it was very small. I think doing it in person would be a little bit easier. Suffice to say, there was a lot involved, which was good to sort of get a little bit of a glimpse into. It is still sort of interesting to me how much of the data entry is done. It's just all done by hand, by a person, all the way from SAP all the way through to the end of the pension estimate. And I do believe that the more and more we can move towards getting that streamlined in an automated fashion, it would be the solution for the future. And that was definitely enforced from that, or I should say, not enforced, but it was made stronger from that hour we spent talking about that.
Yeah, I think that's a useful perspective. And every time I do one from scratch, every time we automate something, then some aspect of that changes, and then the automation needs to change, and then the analysts end up like manually working around it while we try to change it. It's like this never-ending cycle of crazy catch up. When I pop in and do one myself, which is a terrible idea, then Asha finds all kinds of mistakes when I do them myself. But thanks for taking the time to do that, Trustee McClary. Asha was worried that she totally confused you. Asha is our lead financial analyst for folks who are listening.
Yeah, it was a lot of information. Absolutely.
Chair McLeod.
Just trustee now.
Oh, trustee. All right, sorry, have it.
That's right. I think that would be something that I would be interested in doing. If she would not mind walking me through, I could make
Oh,
a
yeah.
point to come do it in person, so I don't have the same challenge that Trustee McClowery did. Then maybe talk with her and see if we can schedule that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I will ask Asha to reach out to you and get that scheduled.
I'd be
And I
happy.
always-
I'd be happy to sit through it again if you do sit down in person.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
And we can always put it up on like the big TV screen in our, conference room, so you're not staring at her monitors. And I always like for folks to meet some of the other. You guys must get so bored of seeing Sam and Kim and I. You realize there are other people who work here that you can meet and talk to. Yes.
And since I'm mentioning coming to do this, I'd also encourage the other trustees, if they haven't already, probably Patrick and Tom, to go sit into a retirement webinar or session that you guys do in person. It's been a few years since I've done that, but it was really very helpful to sit through and listen to all the ins and outs of all the things they have to consider as they present it to a larger group of potential future retirees. It's worthwhile.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair McLeod. I do think that is a great way for trustees. We can send out the dates of upcoming workshops. It's a great way for trustees who are not active employees like Trustee McClary and Trustee Colt also kind of see the members, which you don't get to do most of the time because there'll be 40 or 50 of them in a room, and hear the things that members are concerned about and dealing with.
Yeah, I've sat through, not that I qualify yet, but you could sign up for a PERS retirement workshop. And it's amazing to see all the different questions. I just sit in the back and listen to it all and go, oh, I better start planning. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, it is. It's very interesting, and we try to have good snacks also. All right. If there are no further questions, I'm going to pass things on to Kim to talk about the disability program.
Hey, well, hearing no further questions on the pension side, we'll flip over to disability. I'm Kim Mitchell, FPDR Disability Program Manager, and it's a pleasure to talk to you again today about what's been going on in the disability program this past year. And as many of you trustees know, because you've been involved in this in your way, a big project for us was contracting with a new managed care organization because MHN Caremark Comp closed their doors December 1st of 2023. Chair Hughes, you had a similar experience on the risk side because the closure impacted the whole workers' comp industry. So City Risk was also dealing with the effects of the MHN closure on their side. So what did we do? In our work to contract with Majoris Health Systems, the first thing we did was got approval from the Board of Trustees in December of 2023 to enter into contract negotiations. And from there, we went through lots of training and work to share information about FPDR with Majoris because we are unique. They did not know about FPDR at all, why we're here, what we do. So a lot of work was done to train them and explain the differences between our program and the standard workers' compensation program, who they were really created to serve. So lots of training there, and then training on their part too, of our staff, just about their organization and how they work. So that work, the negotiations and training back and forth with Majoris resulted in a contract being completed April 2nd. And from there, we went into the enrollment process. So the enrollment process went very smoothly. And I would have to just stop and give a shout out to my team because They did so much work behind the scenes to prep us for enrollment. They had to do things like go through all their records and identify providers and who they were affiliated with. One of the things that these doctors do in a managed care organization setting, and they do in a PPO setting, is they are part of a lot of different panels of managed care organizations or PPO organizations, and where they treat matters. So if somebody treats in Gleason Clinic or at a clinic in Northwest Portland or in Southeast Portland, that MCO affiliation could change. So our team had to do a lot of work to go into their claims and track doctors down and find out where their specific clinic was and how it was affiliated. Just lots of hands-on work to do that. They also, had to work with our members to just let them know that this process was going on. We're going to prepare you for enrollment and explain the process to them. We did send notice out to our members to advise them along the way of what was happening. And when the enrollment came, we were prepared because we had done the work behind the scenes to get this moving along. Once we did all that identification and prepared for what I call enrollment, I think Majoris has another word for it, but we began the process of getting the members enrolled. And when the members had questions or concerns about their provider who might not have been on the panel and whether or not they could continue to treat with that provider, what we did was we initiated a credentialing request to the MCO to say, hey, for continuity of treatment, it would be best if this person stayed with that provider. And we work with the MCO to make sure that happened. And in most cases, it did. I think there were a few cases where the providers just didn't want to follow the kind of governance of managed healthcare of Majoris MCO, but the majority did. And in those few cases where the provider didn't want to make that transition, we made sure that they were connected to another provider of like services to continue their care. So that was a lot of the behind the scenes work that went into this process of switching from one MCO to another. We continue to work on technology support because each MCO negotiates discounts with their individual providers that are paid from the amount billed on each treatment claim. What we have to do now is continue the work to update our system to be able to show that discount. There's a slide at the end of this presentation that I had that I'm scrapping because we still have work to do on that technology report to accurately reflect the billed amount, the savings amounts, and separate out the discounts that we have to pay back to the MCOs, because that is something that they have negotiated with their providers to receive that pay, not a part of the services. MHN, who we contracted with in the past, we would split the discounts with them as part of their fee for MCO services. Providence and Majoris Health Systems just don't operate that way. So we've got to now change our technology and our reporting systems to capture and work with them the way they do. And that continues. We're continuing to work on that. And the other thing that we didn't talk much about was we expanded Providence MCO services. One of the services that MHN Caremark provided for us was advisory services. And these are services that give us access to medical providers to answer questions that we may otherwise have to use an independent medical examination to sort out. But these are sometimes complex cases that we've received, and like, boy, is this treatment in this early stage while we're still trying to determine whether or not we are going to approve the claim. Is this something we should be concerned about? Yes or no? Those services were really valuable, and I wanted to make sure we didn't lose that. So while we were also working on bringing Majoris on board, I amended the contract with Providence to provide those services for us. So another way of helping us analyze these claims, evaluate treatment, in a way that continues that important service for us. Next slide. While we were contracting with Majoris, we had to continue pre-certification of the treatment that the members needed until we could get them on with their new MCO. And thankfully, we've got a really experienced staff. Most of our staff have been in the industry probably more than 15 years for sure, some 20 and 30. So they've seen the wide swath of claims that can come in, and they know a lot of the types of treatment that they would receive. So it was kind of a natural jump for us during that period of time without the MCO for those who had been with MHN to conduct some of that pre-certification ourselves. The physical therapy treatments, imaging, and even surgery. For the more complex pre-certification requests, we did utilize independent medical providers to help us iron things out to make sure that we were on the medical, that we aligned with what would be medically practical for that treatment. But when it came to things like imaging and therapies, other ancillary services, and extending chiropractic treatment, a good review of the record and understanding of some of those protocols and durations of treatment really helped us to continue to pre-certify care during that period. And our analysts worked directly with the providers and schedulers to continue the care for our members until we could transition them into the MCO. So that worked really well and was something that was done behind the scenes while they continued to process claims. Next slide. So one of the things that was kind of born out of this pre-certification period was just the importance of diagnostic imaging to the claims process and to the treatment of the member. Because we were successful in doing the pre-certifications during that period of time, and for those members who didn't have an MCO, we adopted a policy to approve diagnostic imaging. We already had a coordination of benefits program that we had arranged with Moda Health. And what that meant prior to our adopting of this new policy was that if a provider called and asked for an MRI, we would coordinate that with Moda Health so that the private health care wasn't billed. It was kind of held in advance by Moda Health until we made a decision. It just reduced frustration from everybody on the back end. And what it allowed was the provider to go ahead and get that treatment, to get that imaging. So the policy that we created is a supplement to that. We still use coordination of benefits because it is a good program. But what we experienced over the past year or so is that there are some providers that just refused. They didn't want to be part of the coordination of benefits. They didn't want to go through getting permission from yet another person to do something. So they just refused, and it really created a stall for everybody. So by adopting this policy, we get to speed up the process for obtaining MRIs. And we have protocols that we use to guide authorizing those MRIs. And what it means for the providers and for our members is that the providers can diagnose conditions early and create a treatment plan early in the claim. They will typically want an MRI on a serious injury claim within days or a week of the injury occurring, just to direct that treatment. So by doing that ourselves, we help to expedite that process. It also aids in the adjudication of our claims because the MRIs sometimes tell a story that may be different than anyone expects in terms of what has caused an injury. Doesn't happen often, but it can. So it does help us in some ways. But most important to us is that we get to move that treatment along for the member. And so that was a good thing born out of all the transition to the new MCO. Next slide. So now we'll talk about the disability program and really the injuries to our firefighters and police officers. And first we'll start with the breakdown of injuries to our firefighters. Chair Hughes, so we have several codes that we can use in each category: injury cause, body part, injury location. And what we do each year is we pick the top five in each category to report. Because they usually will hone on in what's happening most within those categories. So this year, we see that for injuries to our firefighters, and we'll have numbers in the next slide, the actual number of claims, so we'll go over that. But when we see the breakdown, the majority of injuries to our firefighters was in lifting. This is certainly done at the scene of a call. They have lots of folks that fall or are disabled and have to be lifted, or people who fall and are in very peculiar situations and can't get up, and the firefighters are lifting them, or they're getting them out of away from the scene of a fire, having to carry somebody down flights of stairs. They have just so many scenarios. I can't do justice to all the types of things that they do when they're lifting, but they do. And so the number one cause of injury this past fiscal year was in lifting, overexertion being second, and that overexertion again I shouldn't say again, because they happen for a variety of reasons too, but lifting hoses, working long periods of times, pulling buildings apart or whatever to stop a fire. Several scenarios that cause those overexertion type injuries. We have injuries listed as no specific cause, and those are typically assigned to illness or occupational disability cases where it's just not tied to one thing, but your broader exposure at work. And we have 18% of those injuries caused by those types of claims. We have, and then tied for the last two injury causes, we've had falls at the same level and slips and trips, no falls. No doubt at the scene of a fire, it's wet. They are trying to race to the fire to get things done, pulling hoses. There's just so many obstacles in their way as they strive to do their work that these types of things aren't surprising. I'm not probably going into greater detail. I could give you a whole slew of different types of injuries, but categorizing it this way really helps us. So we take a little deeper dive and we look at the body parts that are injured. This year, the majority of injuries were to shoulders, and not really a surprise here when we look at pulling hoses and lifting people and doing the kind of work they do at the scenes of fires, and even sometimes even in training as they prepare for that work. Followed by knees. We have about 15% of the injuries to their knees, 13% to their back. And then we have fingers, and then 4% are respiratory type injuries or body parts. So the lungs, things like that. And when we look at the location, then we see that about 48% of their injuries occur at the scene of a fire, or call, because it could be called out for paramedic type services and not always fires. We have about 19% of their injuries that can occur at the station. The members do a lot of work to stay physically fit to do their work. We do have injuries that occur during exercise, but they also do training things at their site that can also result in injury. That 9% at no specific location, again, is more related to injuries that are illness or occupational disease related, where you can't pinpoint one specific place or time that the injury occurred. And for the first time in several years, non-service has cropped up as top 5. There's no location for non-service claims. And Chair Hughes, for your benefit, non-service claims are claims that members filed. They're qualified when they have 10 or more years of service to access that benefit. They're disabled, and they have an injury or illness that does not qualify as service connected, meaning on the job injury. So we've had enough of those to rise to the level of even showing here this year. And we administer those different standards. There's not really a causation standard applied to those claims. If you have 10 or more years of service and, you know, haven't intentionally hurt yourself or done something like that, you're going to receive that benefit. It's 50% of their base pay and it's taxed. So it's more of a catastrophic type care benefit as opposed to a disability benefit that pays more in line with what the members would be paid if they weren't injured. So yeah, we've had a number of those this year. So next, we'll look at the police injuries. So when we look at injury cause for our police, we see that about 19% of their injuries were caused by assaults and human altercations, and this is common. We will see this probably as one of the top 5 always, because they're always dealing with assaults and altercations in their attempt to arrest a suspect or chase or go after a suspect. These things happen and is a typical part of their experience. We have about 18% are motor vehicle accidents. Motor vehicle, I think is different than, I think we do have a separate category for motorcycle. So motor vehicle accidents, and we've had a few that where members were actually hit by a motor vehicle on purpose to injure the officer, which is awful, but would fall under this category. Whenever we have motor vehicle accidents that are caused by another party, we do pursue that. We pursue recovery on that, and when we can get that. So it's something that's standard procedure for us. We have a 15% here with no specific cause, and those again tend to be the occupational disability type cases where I can't say I got it here or there. It's more of an exposure type thing. We have a 12% miscellaneous workers' comp, and those tend to be claims where, for instance, somebody hurts their knee after chasing a suspect and getting into an altercation. And it's like they can't tell you which one of those events, but coming out of it, they've experienced an injury. And so that happens quite a bit where there are multiple things going on. And then last we have for the injury cause, about 5% was slip and trips, no falls. A lot of that is in pursuit where we see those types of injuries occur. When we look at their body parts, we see that 24% about is multiple body parts. Typically from altercations, again, they're, you know, they might hurt the shoulder, knee, might get a scratch on the face. Multiple parts can be injured. Finger, certainly in apprehension, suspect, handcuffing suspects are what we have next at 9% are injuries to fingers. And also tied is 9%, slightly over, for injuries to their knees. We have 6% this year reported as injuries to ankles. Again, not surprising given a lot of pursuit and apprehension of suspects. And then we have 5%, slightly over 5% of the injuries to their wrist. We look at injury location. About 45% of them occur at the scene of a call. About 22% there at the training site. They do a lot of bicycle training, defensive tactics, and other training, and they get pretty intense. So they do have injuries there, trying to mimic what they will experience when they're out there on the street. We have 17% in vehicles, motor vehicle, motorcycle accidents. So those locations are variable, but we have that. And then we have another 10% at the precinct. They do some of their trainings at the individual precincts as well. We probably could combine the training site and precinct, but it does help to be able to distinguish it for their purposes of looking at losses and where they're occurring. And then we have, I think, about 2% that they would say are multiple locations. These, again, are the injuries, the occupational disabilities where they can't say, I got it at this location. So next slide.
Oh, Kim, I had a question.
Sure.
Well, first I wanted to piggyback on kudos to your team for the MCO transition.
Thank you.
There's a lot hiding there. And then if we go back to the graphs, either one is fine.
Sure.
It struck me, I make presentations like this on other types of graphs, and people always ask me, but the data looks where it should be for the types of positions that we're talking about. My question really is I have an assumption that this data is shared with, say, fire and police safety professionals in terms of loss prevention, which is out a little outside of FPDR here, but is this being shared with them, and are they active on it?
As you know, it's slowed since COVID. COVID kind of threw everything off kilter, but historically, we would provide this information to their loss
Okay.
prevention folks. They had folks that would take it and analyze it and use it for their internal purposes, you know, and reducing losses or whatever they wanted to implement. I know in the past, fire has used some of these programs to implement specialty programs to reduce injuries.
Okay.
So I don't know that we've shared this since we've come out of COVID. I imagine that will pick up because the COVID years just skewed everything
Okay.
so greatly. But historically, yes.
Great, thank you.
So let's see, 24, I think we covered that. So next slide. And boy, this one tells a story. So these are the number of new claims filed each fiscal year. We don't record the recurrence claims because they're very variable, or new post-retirement claims, or the existing set of claims that we have. We report new claims, and what we can see is that this year we have the lowest, probably the lowest since I've been here. I don't know about how they've kept the record prior to the reform, but 231. There might be off by a couple because some of the injuries are filed later, but for purposes of a report, we have a cutoff date and we use that. So 231 injuries this year, 117 in fire and 114 police. And if you look at the line graph at the top, this is just a drastic drop when we look at the height of claims filed during the COVID years, 2021 and 2022 fiscal years, where we had those astronomical numbers. But there has been a decline. And I can't really explain it with exactness, but there are a number of things that we think have contributed. You know, we just haven't had the protest last year or a catastrophic type event that would lead to numerous claim filings. We've only had 2 new PTSD claims this year, which is a dramatic drop from the prior years. There are slightly fewer members overall to file claims, so that may have some slight contribution to it. And as Stacy shared, we have a lot more FPDR 3 members than we do 2 members. And I think newer employees are less likely to file claims. So those are just some of the general thoughts about the reduction, absent any, what I know to be any real hard-hitting loss prevention and reduction efforts. So it is what it is for this year. I think it's a one-off, an anomaly. I don't quite know how to take it. Is this something that will be a trend into the next several years? I don't know. But one thing I do know is that if you would call it fortunate, it happened at the time we needed to transition to a new MCO. So all of the work that we had to dedicate to that project could be done in a way that I don't think we would have been able to do had we had the same more typical claim numbers. I think we would have had to hire a consultant and get some extra help. So I don't know what you call that, but that's the way it worked out for that year. And that's what we have. Next slide.
Kim, before you get going here, this is Sam here. I have to leave here real quick because I have some
Okay.
appointment I've got to go to. And do you want to talk about the position you're not filling just real quick? Because that sort of falls in on that slide you
Sure.
just went over.
Sure.
So I'll
Yeah.
let you go there. So I'm going to turn this over to Kim, Stacy, and Julie to finish out the rest of the board meeting. Have a good one, everybody.
Thanks, Sam. And yes, we had added a position probably a year and a half or 2 years ago because the numbers looked like they were going to just continue to rise, even with our more typical claims. We had 343 new claims in fiscal year 2020. And then the COVID years just shot it out of the park. And when we look at these, the new claims that come in, that doesn't take into account the whole workload that we have, because we have existing claims that remain open. We have post-retirement claims that we're processing. But this year is what it is, and we don't know what that's going to be. But what the low number of caseloads has meant is that our team doesn't have as much work, and they've done a great work to close claims. And the projections for closed claims will mean that our numbers are even lower. And I can't predict a rebound to the levels that we've had in 2023 and 2020 and back. So I wanted to err on the side of caution and not put a pause on the fill of that position. Keep, work with the staff we have, with the low numbers that we have. And at the point where we see a return to what would be more normal and typical for us, I think it would be wise at that time to consider opening that position again. So we paused the recruitment so that we can, again, use the staff when we really need it. And right now we don't. So that is why we are not moving forward with that position. Any questions on that? All right. So the next slide, 26, is our days to claim decision rate. Everybody likes to hear this information. We certainly strive to approve our claims. I'm sorry, these are our approval rates. The next one is our days to claim decision. But this year we'll see that 91% of the claims filed were approved. Close to 3% were denied. We have about 2% of our claims that were incomplete applications. And you may have something similar, Chair Hughes, and risk management. It's been a while now since I've done workers' compensation claims, but here the member may file a claim for benefits and then they decide not to complete it. Then it's more like they've documented it, but they didn't treat, so there's no benefit to pay. And we process those as incomplete applications, and we will just close them once we are sure that the member is certain about their decision not to pursue it further. About 3% of the claims were pending at the time we created this report, and those are claims that have come in that we're reviewing to determine whether or not they will be approved or denied. And then we have about 3% of the claims that were filed that were withdrawn. And these members have submitted a DILD report, and in some cases they treated, but maybe their provider has said, that's not work related. Or, is usually what happens. They find out that maybe something they thought was work related wasn't, and they decide to withdraw that claim. Any questions on that? Then we'll go to the next slide, which is our days to claim decision. And here we'll see that we put the number of claims approved in each category here, and I'll just put it out here in terms of percentages. And I'm pleased to report that about 50% of the claims that we received were decided within 30 days. That's a quick work on the part of our analysts to reach out to the members right away when we get notice of their injury, and to work with them and gather all the information they need to make a claims decision. And when they're able to do that promptly, it just everything that flows from it, the member's treatment, the recovery, placement into transitional duty, if we need to do that, just goes at a faster pace. So we like that. We want to try to keep it at least over 50%. We have 60 days is our target goal under administrative rule to accept or deny claims. We see that about 25% of the claims that we reviewed were decided within 60 days. We have another 8% that were decided within 90 days, and those are almost always the more complex cases, the cancers, the hearts, the stress, claims that involved usually an independent medical exam or review to help us sort out whether or not those conditions are work-related. And occasionally it does take more than 90 days. We have still had, and I don't know that this is going to change because the trajectory and the access to treatment after COVID has declined quite a bit. And I haven't seen that rebound, but trying to get providers to examine patients in these our members in these complex cases is a little more challenging, and finding providers who will treat in some of these cases is challenging. So it creates a delay for us even in record gathering and getting information we need to make that determination. All said, our target is to get things done within 60 days sooner if we can, because we know that that's a benefit to everybody to get them in and get them processed and moved along. That's what we have here. Any questions on that? All right. So now we'll look at the disability cost by fiscal year, and this line graph just shows an increase in our overall disability cost. This is our medical and time loss together, and the next slide will give us a breakdown. So we see we've got, I think, about a 17% increase over last fiscal year, and even a wider percentage of increase over our low in 2020, where we were 5.5 million. Certainly there are reasons for increases, and we'll talk about those in the next slide as we break them down. So I think we'll just go to the next slide. So here we have in beige our cost, the time loss cost, which is disability, which we will break that down further in the next slide. But our disability is the biweekly disability benefit we pay to our members, the monthly benefit that we pay to members who cannot return to police or fire employment after an injury, and then oh geez, I just went blank, my apologies, and the wage subsidy that we pay to the bureaus when they provide transitional duty employment to our members. So 4.21 million is that cost for time loss cost. The real jump is in the medical. Medical after COVID has increased. We know that during the COVID era, from 2021 on through 2023, when we saw the decline and transition to more typical injury claims, but we saw a lot of delay in treatment. That accounted for the low numbers in medical payout. But as we've rebounded and come out of COVID, surgeries that were delayed were done. We know that medical costs, period, continue to rise. The cost for prescription drugs has continued to rise even more at a faster pace than even our medical. And our prescription costs for our cancer claims or people who have catastrophic injuries, even our PTSD claims where they're using a variety of medications to help stabilize a member have really increased. So I'm sure there are lots of other reasons. I look at kind of the main and typical reasons we see those kinds of increases, and that's what we have here. In terms of our increase in disability benefits, we have sometimes the more mature workers who are receiving a disability benefit, and they have a higher rate of pay. So those claims tend to be more costly. We are still paying on some of the PTSD claims that we approved during the kind of the height of those claims coming in following the protest in 2020. And so we are still paying that. Those PTSD claims are some of the most long and enduring claims, and they are most often the claims that result in a member not being able to return to work. They can't even do transitional duty because being in that environment is triggering. So we do see that increase and that the extended duration of pay on those particular claims. Any questions about that? And we'll move on to the next slide.
Hi, Trustee McLeod has a question.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Sorry, Trustee McLeod. You're muted.
Thanks. Just trying to get a better understanding. There were a lot fewer claims this period, but there was an increase from 6.4 to 7.5 million. And it doesn't look like there was a dramatic increase in the number of claims for monthly or biweekly or return to week. So is it just really that the average cost for a claim just went way up?
Yes,
Okay.
the cost per claim. Yeah, higher disability cost, much higher medical cost. Yeah.
Thank you.
And so next slide. So this next line chart shows the breakdown of payments, the disability payments that we have paid out. And let me get my information right here. So we have the blue represents the biweekly payments, and those are the payments that we've paid to active members who, Chair McLeod, did you have another question? I didn't want to just keep going if you had a question, but maybe that's from previous. So, so in terms of the biweekly disability benefits, the benefits we pay to members who are active duty and on disability and we project will return back to work, we've seen a 9%, about a 9% decrease in costs from 2023 to 2024, and that's just in that biweekly benefit. Part of what is offsetting that is the gold bar at the bottom, is more utilization of the transitional duty return to work program. And so Chair Hughes, we operate sort of like the workers' comp department, but better, because for members who are assigned transitional duty, they are paid from the Bureau. So they continue to accrue leaves and things like that. And we reimburse them for that time. So if up to 180 days, we have some guidelines there for that, but we'll reimburse them for utilizing the transitional duty program. And what we've seen, and it's kind of an industry standard, is that people who get back to work sooner, even if it's in transitional duty, typically return to work and return to work quicker. So we are pleased. You see that over time, that transitional duty has been kind of steady, no growth in that. I hope that we continue to see an increase in utilization of that program and that it will serve to offset the biweekly benefit that we pay to our members. What we show a slight increase in is the monthly disability benefit. And so, Chair Hughes, we have members who are suffering an injury or illness or disease, and they can't go back to police or fire employment. They continue to receive a monthly benefit until they disability retire, as long as that disability continues to be the reason they're unable to work. We have a few categories for these folks. We have people who are permanent and total who are not able to go back to any employment because of their condition. The majority of them are able to pursue some type of employment. We call that SGA, which is substantial gainful activity. And those folks are able to pursue some employment, earning a third of the base pay at injury to supplement the disability benefit that they get, which is reduced from 75% to 50% at the time they're determined to be SGA. So from fiscal year 23 to 24, we had a couple of people transition from biweekly to monthly PTSD claims, which again are some of our more challenge. I think in 22, 23, we had 2 PTSD claims. In 24, we had a catastrophic injury case and a PTSD claim. Those are tough ones for us, and it really is hard to get them back to work. But through efforts to look at work that they can do, they come in with a lot of skills, a lot of transferable skills. They're usually able to get out there and be productive. We've had people become teachers and other things, and so what we do with those folks is we continue to follow them. Some of them fall off the wagon in terms of employment, lose a job, or they are not going after work like they should. And those are a constant battle for us. But when the program works well, that combination of the FPDR disability benefit and the work that they are able to find kind of makes them whole. And so we don't often, if we look at this dating, I'm sorry, was there a question? I thought I heard something. Maybe I'm just hearing things. But when we look at the height of those that were on monthly from fiscal year 2015, there's been kind of a steady drop over the years until this past year where we've seen that increase. Not ideal, but something that does happen.
Yeah, it's worth noting both your disability costs and your possibly time loss too. But when you look at your yearly numbers back and forth, any catastrophic injury or a few will skew those numbers so hard.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. It does. Yeah. So I think this is, we have one more slide, and that is just my slide that I wish I never inserted, but could you, we'll just pull it up. And this is something that we're working on. We are transitioning from the way our system was geared to support the payment of the Managed Health Care Northwest to how Majoris, MCO, and Providence show their discounting. So this just is not right. We've seen that the numbers were pulled from places that they shouldn't have. And so I apologize for this report, and we will be working to fix it. We are working with Majoris right now to create a program and system that allows us to accurately reflect the discounts that have to go back to their providers, so it won't be reflected as a true savings to us, because it's not. But it will just give us accurate paid and savings. And just Chair Hughes, just for your information, we take a reduction of our the actual bill from the Oregon fee schedule that we get from Oregon Workers' Comp. And so we utilize that to reduce our bills. And that is the greatest number of reductions occurs from that alone. When we had MHM, we split the difference, and that was an additional discount. And we do have times where our bill payer will negotiate a discount when a member is injured out of state or is treating out of state. Maybe they were injured in Oregon, but they've moved out of state for some reason, or out of state for some reason, and have to have care. We will negotiate a reduction, and that will be reflected too, but not this time. My apologies. We will fix that so that we can accurately report this information to you.
Great. Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Stacy. And I actually like this chart. It shows good savings. So
yeah, thank you. There are some savings, just not quite what we have here, but
yeah.
Yeah.
That was a great presentation. I guess
Thank you.
being first time here, before we move on, do we need a break or anything, or just power on through? Okay, we'll power on through then. We are moving toward, what do we have? Review of fire and police trustee election process.
Okay, I'm going to talk about this today. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So the terms for trustees Culp and McLaury are active trustees. They both expire this year, December 31st, 2024. So we may or may not be holding an election. We'll find out soon. This is just kind of an overview of the process, and this is straight from the admin rules, admin rule 5.2.04. So the first thing we need to do is notify membership that we'll be holding an election, and the admin rule says that we should do that on or before the first Monday in October. This year, that will be October 7th of 2024. So what we'll do is we'll post written notices in the fire and police workplaces, and then also a big shout out to the liaisons and unions for the email distribution that they always help us with when we do an election. That's very helpful. So any active member can nominate themselves. And the way they can do that is by calling the FPDR office and requesting a declaration of candidacy. Also this year, we are going to allow that to happen via email. So anyone can contact the FPDR office, basically Sam, and declare themselves a nominee. The deadline for a member to nominate themselves for this election will be Monday, October 21st, 2024. And that's the date that we'll know whether or not we're holding an election. If we are, notice of nominations will be posted in the fire and police workplaces, and that'll happen on October 28th, 2024. Again, I think that the liaisons and unions assist with that. So if only one active member is nominated for one or both of the trustees that are open, then we'll hold an election. And basically what FPDR do is we'll get ballots prepared and we will mail them out. And those will be mailed out on November 1st, 2024. That is a Friday. Included with the ballot will be a postage paid stamp back to the FPDR office with ballot enclosed on the envelope. And it's good to know that anyone who wants to vote and have their vote counted must return their vote in that ballot enclosed envelope. You can send that via mail in the envelope, or you could also drop it by the FPDR office if you wanted to. And the deadline to have your vote considered is Monday, December 2nd. That's because December 1st falls on a Sunday this year, and so that's the technical deadline, but we extend it when the first falls on a weekend. And then I kind of like a calendar. Oh, I'm sorry. If we do hold an election within 2 days of receiving all of the ballots, the city auditor or their designee will count the votes and we'll figure out who won. Very unlikely, but in the event that no candidate got the majority of the vote, then we'll have a runoff election, and basically the process will start over again. We'll send ballots and postage paid envelopes with ballot enclosed stamp on that envelope, and membership will have a chance to vote again. And I always like a calendar view. So at the end of this, I put just kind of the months with the dates that all of these deadlines will hit. It's not very complicated, but does anyone have any questions? Oh, Kyle?
Yeah, as an incumbent, do I still need to resubmit an application or
a declaration of candidacy?
declaration? Yeah.
Yes, please. That way we know you're interested.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Does anyone else have a question? All right, hearing none. Summary of expenditures, that's Stacy.
All right, tagging back in, and we're flying through these last couple things. Stop me if you have any questions. You should have 2 reports in front of you, which happens once a year. The first is the final expenditure report from last year, the fiscal year ended June 30, 2024. And the second report is spending for the first 2 months of this year. So looking at the first report from last year, I just want to say that we ended the year within budget, which, you know, it's not good if you don't do that, both overall and within each major object category as defined by local budget law. The graph at the top, we kind of show you budget categories that are programmatic that we think you're probably interested in as the board. But down below in the table, you'll see the categories as they're defined in local budget law, which is where budget authority actually exists. Which is, skipping over the revenue piece because there's no appropriation there, but down to personnel, external materials and services, internal materials and services, capital outlay, and then fund expenses all together are the categories. Another kind of thing to just note is that property taxes came in basically right on the money last year, 99.8% of budget. So that was kind of interesting this year that they came in so close to budget. I mean, they're usually close, but not quite that close. If we flip to the next slide, Julie, and just look at spending so far this year, not much to point out yet. I would just say that, note that we haven't entered an actual number for beginning fund balance yet because we don't have an audited number yet. But unaudited, I can tell you it's about 16.7 million. Which is good news, which means we're back to our target range for fund balance. That balance, for those of you who've been on the board for a few years and information for Chair Hughes, balance was a little high because we had built up fund contingency during the pandemic with all the retirements and disability claims. And I just wanted to make sure we had enough cash on hand to pay for all the unexpected, and we did. And now we've been spending that fund balance down. So we have now successfully spent our fund balance down. So I'm happy about that. Really, that's, yes.
Are there any, I guess the term, I'm struggling with the term, specific rules or guidelines around managing the contingency?
No, the ones that apply to all funds in Oregon local budget law, but nothing beyond that in city charter. Okay. So the ones that apply to all funds in local budget law are that we have to have a supplemental budget in order to pull funds out of contingency and actually appropriate them to be spent.
Okay.
Basically, the only rule. Are there other questions or other things that folks see? Trustee Kramer.
Is the taxes revenue in November, is that pretty consistent? That's when you're getting the bulk of it every single year?
We sometimes don't get it until December. It kind of depends on the county. Multnomah County is obviously we get some money from Washington and Clackamas County as well, but Multnomah County, when they get their tax turnovers really flowing to us. So there have been years where we didn't get the bulk of that money until early December, but typically it happens in the second half of November.
Okay. Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Stacy, I think you discussed this with Kyle in the very beginning of the meeting, and I'm slow catching up to it. On the first page, we have the interfund cash transfer, a budget of $750,000, and then at the bottom of that same first page, we have the interfund cash transfer with a roughly $900,000 figure. Would you walk me through those again, please?
Sure. So that's for last year. So we're not talking about the same thing Trustee McClowery and I were talking about at the beginning, where we were talking about the interfund loan from the Parks Bureau in the current fiscal year, which is what we're using to cover our cash flow deficit in the current fiscal year. Last year in 23-24, we issued tax anticipation notes to cover that cash flow deficit. And so those you will see down in fund expenses in debt retirement. You'll see 33 million-ish in January that we are paying. That's when we're paying the bonds back. You'll see the money coming in bond and note proceeds, 33 million coming in August. So that's how we handled the cash flow deficit last year. This year, it was more affordable and less risky to borrow some money from Parks. But we still have these fund transfer expenses and revenues set up here. So that 750,000 is our reserve fund. So we do have an FPDR reserve fund. I don't know if the board even remembers that it exists. I do mention it every year during budget. So we have our operating fund, which is what we're always talking about, which has a couple $100 million in it. And then we have the reserve fund with 750,000. which is kind of hilarious. That's just set at that amount by city charter established in 1948. I don't know what I'm going to do with $750,000. You know, I mean, personally, I could do a lot with $750,000, but in the plan of this size, that is totally worthless to us. But we do budget every year so that it's available to us to have that money transferred to the operating fund just in case we ever got to a point where we did need that money. It needs to be budgeted in order for us to move back. So we budget it, and then we budget the payment going back to the reserve fund down below in interfund cash transfers, because it has to be repaid by city charter back into the reserve fund at the end of the fiscal year. You know, honestly, if we were redoing the charter and we cared to bother, we might get rid of it or increase it or do something different with it. And then the reason that it's 900,000 instead of 750 is that we have to pay general fund overhead, which is a cash transfer to the general fund. That is, you know, our share of paying for things like city council offices and some other like emergency management and some things that are funded you know, citywide, and we have to pay our share through a transfer to the general fund. Does that answer that question?
It does, and I think
Well
it
enough.
anticipates the follow-up. I'm sorry, did I just talk
Okay.
over you?
No, not at all.
If we jump over to the next page at the bottom, is the last line item sort of the current year's version of that?
Actually, I should have pointed this out to you. So again, Trustee Kramer, you're so good with these expense reports. You're always pointing out the good stuff. So this, I should have pointed out to you, that parks budget is not in here because, so it still shows as debt retirement. See that 46 million down there in the second to last line, middle line for fund expenses, and 45 million in bond and note proceeds up above. Now, the reason for that, oh my gosh, I hope that Parks Finance staff aren't listening. So when we went to put this into the approved version of the budget, when City Council was approving the budget, the Parks Finance staff did not get their side of the transaction in time, and it has to balance, and they didn't get it in time. So then poor Asha's coming up a lot this time. You know, she had put it all in there and taken out the tax anticipation note proceeds and put in the interfund loan, and the parks didn't get theirs in time. And so then the budget office made us go take it out because it had to balance, and they wouldn't let parks put it in because they were past the deadline. Anyway, and then this is really obscure, but then between approved and adopted budget, there are rules. Again, Oregon local budget law, you can't increase the size of your fund by more than 10%. And that was going to put the parks fund over more than 10% in appropriation. So then they couldn't do it in the adopted budget. So it ended up happening in July, on July 17th, council. So they adopted the budget that was effective July 1st. And then on July 17th, council amended our budget and the parks budget to put that in. So you don't see it in the original budget. If I had a revised budget column in this report, as I do in the prior year report, then you would see that reshuffling, and you would see that we've taken out the tax anticipation note, the debt proceeds, and put in the interfund loan budget for parks. And Trustee Kramer, you really, I think you missed your true calling, becoming an attorney. You really should have been digging around in budgets your whole life. Very good.
I think people become pension lawyers because they don't have the personality to become financial analysts.
Okay. I can assure you that most financial analysts do not have sparkling personalities, but some of them do.
May I ask you one more, and this is very small numbers?
Yes, of course.
The personnel item for April is bounced up just by 50 grand, but it's significantly higher than any of the other entries. Were we?
I'm sorry, I'll let you finish.
No, you know where I was going.
Yes, I believe that's the vacation payout that I was referring to earlier, the vacation leave payout for a retiring employee.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions about fund expenditures? And maybe this is a good time to just let Chair Hughes know also that this board, the only budget in the city, this board has exclusive authority to adopt the FPDR budget. City Council does not have authority to adopt this budget. So we participate in the citywide budget process because we do need to be included as a blended component unit of the city, but the board has budget authority rather than city council.
Can I move my budget over here and we can work side by side?
Well, no.
There's probably some rule against that. I don't know.
We have to be careful with these fiduciary funds.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right. Yes.
Any more updates?
There are none.
There are none. Are there any more future meeting agenda items?
There are. So I'm
Okay.
going to talk to you guys about the November meeting. The November meeting, we always go back a week. Instead of it being the fourth Tuesday of the month, we move it because of Thanksgiving. So we will be meeting virtually November 19th at 1 p.m. as always. And I'll remind everyone that will be a virtual meeting. And in that meeting, we're going to discuss the outside counsel contract that is up for bid. We're going to talk about future board meeting location. That's kind of up in the air right now. It sounds like we'll be in council chambers, but we need to get more information. And then there's going to be another admin rule change. We had just recently changed the definition of physician assistant, and now we want to either add or change it to physician associate. I'm not quite sure which will be happening, but that's to match the Oregon workers' comp rule. And then if we are not going to be meeting in council chambers, we're going to need to update the admin rule that says that we meet in council chambers, but we'll see. That's still to be determined. And then also we're going to go over the new city organizational structure and the impact that is going to have on FPDR. The January meeting, that's going to be January 28th, 2025. At this point in time, the location is unknown. You might want to bear with us, and it could be virtual is what I'm trying to say. So at that meeting, we're going to talk about the trustee election results, possibly introduce new trustees. We'll see. We're going to talk about the budget approval. And then, of course, it's been 2 years, so we're going to have the actuarial evaluation and levy adequacy analysis. So there are some future meeting topics that will need to be discussed at the March meeting. We do have an annual benefit adjustment at the March meeting, although that's all we have on the agenda for now. So there are 3 topics we could discuss in March. One would be forming a committee to review the FPDR2 pension plan. One could be a discussion on soliciting a study to compare the FPDR disability program to the Oregon workers' comp program. And then finally, the Board of Trustees handbook review. These are agenda items we've been carrying with us and talking about discussing. So I'm open to anyone suggesting one or more of these topics for the March meeting. And we could also discuss this at the next meeting if nobody has anything jumping out to them.
I'll speak up. Nothing's jumping out to me right away for March anyways. I would, if you don't mind, Julie, circling back just for a second to the first item in November, the November 19th, you said outside counsel contract, or what exactly was that agenda item?
That is, I don't know if that's going to be an information or an action item, but we're just going to hear about the process and where we are in the process of determining who will continue to be our outside counsel. It's been 10 years and we have to do an RFP. Lauren Dornhauer has been outside counsel from Ogletree Deacons for a number of years. And so there's going to be an RFP process to see if we will continue working with Ogletree Deacons, or I don't know what will happen with that. We'll see.
So this dovetails into something I wanted to bring up for good of the order. And this may actually be a Sam question. It's not specific to outside counsel. It's something that I found in the administrative rules. This is something that was brought up among the membership. It's in Section 5, the Office of Administrative Hearings for FPDR. And it says that the independent body has been authorized by the Board of Trustees to review decisions of the director that's concerning retirement or death benefits. And I could be wrong, I don't recall it, but I don't recall this board authorizing anybody for that, the Office of Administrative Hearings. Do we have that staffed right now? Or can anybody, Stacy, can you speak to that for me?
Sure, although Kim might be a better person since most of those hearings are disability related, although you can also have pension, and we have had pension hearings. So that contract is with the Office of Administrative Hearings right now with the state of Oregon. And Kim might be more familiar with the contract, but I'm sure the board did approve that contract at some point. And Franco is nodding, and so also Franco might be a better person to speak to that. My memory is that there was only one body that could actually provide that service, and it was the Office of Administrative Hearings at the state of Oregon. But Franco, do you maybe want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you, Franco Luchin, City Attorney's Office. I don't know exactly when that was entered into first. My suspicion is it was late 2007, early 2008. And it would have been in the form of an intergovernmental agreement between the city and the state of Oregon. The Office of Administrative Hearings does all the administrative hearings in the state for state agencies. And my recollection is FPDR 2007 or so did inquire with like the Oregon Workers' Comp Division, and they I don't know exactly what I wasn't involved in those communications, but I know that the search then continued, and OAH, the Office of Administrative Hearings, is who FPDR ended up going with. So it's not trustee, it's not like Lowry, it's not like an annual, I'm not sure which of the administrative rules you're referring to, but it's not, it derives from the charter requirement that the board hire at least one hearings officer, and traditionally there have been two at OAH. So they'll typically, what I've seen is they would send the hearings officer is also known as an administrative law judge. They would send, one appeal denial to one of the judges, and then the other one would get the next one, or however they're divvying up that work. And then the charter also requires the board to have a panel of 3 administrative law judges to hear appeals of disability decisions. And so the Office of Administrative Hearings also staffs that, and the charter has a requirement that those 3 judges have staggered terms. So that's anyway, that's all been within the OAH, including death benefit hearings and retirement benefit hearings, although like Stacy said, those are much more rare than a disability hearing would be.
So there is a historical contract from the board trustees with the state agency, the OAH, and that just sort of stands in perpetua, or that's not the word. It just stands until something changes or until something else is agreed upon from the board, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't, a good question. I mean, it would not be in perpetuity, but
actually, Franco, I have it pulled up right now.
Oh.
Yeah, it is an IGA. Good point,
Yeah.
Franco. We don't have contracts with other governments. We have intergovernmental agreements. And the current one expires on June 30, 2025. So yeah, so we have so we have an IGA for that purpose that currently extends through June 30.
What's the beginning of that? The term of that one is it 2015?
It looks like it was an extension of an earlier IGA, and that extension, it looks like it began in 2021, but it's an extension of an earlier IGA. And
okay, yeah,
pulling it up on the fly. I'm not sure, when the original.
Yeah, I mean, my recollection, like I said, is somewhere around 2000, because I know there were hearings as early as late 2007, early 2008, under the new charter.
Okay, thank you. So at any point, if anyone does appeal a benefit decision, it'll end up going to the OAH and be assigned to an ALJ for somebody at the state.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Does anyone have any questions or another topic they'd like to present?
No.
Okay. I think we're
Okay.
done for the day. Oops, sorry, Patrick.
No, that's fine. What's the, is there a formal terminology closing the board meeting? So
I think you just declare us
I
adjourned.
think this meeting is closed. So great to meet all of you, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take
Thanks,
care.
folks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.